In this lesson, we'll be continuing our conversation about foreign policy, but instead of talking about just ways that countries talk to each other to try and fix problems, remember we call that diplomacy, we're going to look at things that countries actually do. The title of this lesson is Action. So actions are when countries actually do something other than talking to attempt to fix a problem. So our objectives are to understand the meaning of foreign policy and to be able to describe types of foreign policy. Our central questions are what types of foreign policy are there and how does foreign policy impact the relationship of the U.S. government with other governments of other countries. So remember, why are we doing all of this? We're trying to figure out what the government does when it comes to other countries, and we're going to try and better understand ways that the United States government interacts with other countries and other groups. And later we'll be looking at what that has to do with us and what that has to do with our everyday lives. Because a big reason that the United States decides to interact with other countries is because of the benefits that it has, or the reasons that they see it as necessary to protect U.S. interests. So remember, in the last lesson we talked about diplomacy, and we talked about how diplomacy was simply just two or more countries sitting down and talking, and just trying to figure out a solution to a problem just by talking. Action's different. Action is when one or more countries decides to actually do something and take direct action with another country. So usually this happens if talking was not working. So diplomacy is usually what's tried first, and if just talking doesn't work, then a country will decide to actually act or actually do something to try and get another country to maybe act a little bit differently. An example would be maybe you had a country that was trying to create nuclear weapons, and you just sat down with that country and talked about why you thought that was a bad idea, and basically tried to get them to not create nuclear weapons just by talking. But then they decided we're going to do it anyway. But you didn't like that. So maybe you penalized them in some way. Or maybe you actually sent troops to their country to try and get rid of their ability to create nuclear weapons. That's an example of action. So in that scenario, they tried to talk about the problem first. That didn't work. So one of the countries decided to actually take action. So what are the types of action? These are just the main categories, like the main things that you can look at when you're thinking about types of action. I'll go through them one by one. Just like the last lesson, I'll tell you the type. There'll be a picture that kind of goes with that type. And then there'll be a definition about what it is. So the first one's a sanction. You can see in the picture there, if you like football, that's a picture of a referee throwing a flag. And if you know football, a flag is a penalty, something that gets enforced and hurts a team in some way because they did something wrong. Sanctions just like that. It's when other countries punish a country by cutting that country off from trade goods and by refusing to negotiate. The country remains isolated until it agrees to make changes. So a sanction is just a penalty against a country. For example, maybe the United States was sending food to a country that didn't have a lot of food. And the food was meant to help them in some way. The United States decided we're not going to send that anymore. That would be like a sanction. There's all kinds of different sanctions. They usually involve cutting off some kind of help. Or maybe cutting off a supply of money, or maybe you're not trading with a country anymore, not giving them some of the things that they need through trade. Those are examples of sanctions. You're penalizing the country, and you're doing that to try and get them to change in some way. The idea is maybe that penalty will change their mind and make them say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore because of these sanctions or because of these penalties. Another one is aid. You can see the picture in the middle there is just of food. Aid is when a country sends money, food, or medicine to another country that is having a crisis. So, for example, you guys probably remember when there was a big earthquake in Haiti, and a bunch of countries from around the world sent food, money, and medicine to try and help the people of Haiti. That was an example of action. So action's not always a bad thing. It can be something that's used to help. all that money, food, and medicine that was sent to Haiti is an example of aid. The most famous one, or one that people tend to think of the most when they think of foreign policy, is military force. That is simply when a country sends its military to another country and uses warlike tactics to make that country change. So if you use your military in any way to try and change something that another country is doing, or get rid of a government altogether, that's an example of military force. Usually that is the last thing that is used. All the things that we've talked about, all the things in diplomacy, negotiations, mediation, treaty, all those things are tried first. Then it usually goes to sanctions. And if all that doesn't work, then military force is used. But it's actually used a lot less than people seem to think. So are these things like anything in our daily lives? Remember the last lesson we looked at ways that diplomacy kind of can come into our lives when it comes to having something wrong with a friend or not getting along with a friend in some way. And we talked about examples for that. We'll do the same thing here with actions. So how can a sanction be like something that you experience when maybe you're not getting along with a friend? Let's say you're not getting along with a friend and you decide that you're going to block them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever until they chill out, until they calm down. You're doing something to try and change the behavior of someone else. That's a sanction or a penalty. You're blocking that friend as a penalty to try and get them to change in some way. You're hoping that you blocking them will get them to change their behavior. That would be an example of a sanction. Let's say you send something to your friend to try and improve the relationship, like clothes or a card. That could be considered aid. You're providing your friend with something, and by doing that, you're hoping for a positive response. You're hoping to have a better relationship with your friend based on that aid or that clothes or card or whatever you're sending to them. Military force would be like if you and your friend unfortunately got into a physical fight as a result of your differences. Maybe other things were tried. Other things were tried to repair that relationship and make things better. They don't work, so you end up actually physically fighting. That would be like what military force is. So how can you remember what action means? Just think about anything that isn't talking and writing stuff down. If a country is actually doing something to another country, or two countries are actually deciding to do something and actually engaging in an action, it's an action. If it's just talking and just making agreements about doing things, that's just diplomacy. It's when a country actually does something that it becomes action. And those actions usually involve one side doing something like penalizing, helping, or attacking another country. Alright, that's it for this lesson. Make sure that you answer the questions that are underneath this video. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. If not, good luck.